Who are Mizzou's billionaires? Because recent news tells me that's as important of a question as anything you're asking on the field. So let's talk about that and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I want to talk about tradition. Ah, yes, tradition. A lot of people got upset with me suggesting that a junior should perhaps be honored on senior day as well. Talk a little bit about that topic a little later in the show. And also, how much better is this basketball team? Because I think it's pretty clear the men's basketball team is at least improved from the low bar of last season. But I'll tell you, there's a big story in college football. If you follow recruiting, you're going to be well aware of it. But if you just watch the games every Saturday, this may have flown a little bit under your radar. But according to a lot of people, Bryce Underwood, the number one high school quarterback in the 2025 high school class, well, he was reportedly getting about $1.5 million a year to remain committed to LSU. Well, guess who eventually blew that number out of the water? It was the University of Michigan, his home state, who is eager to get back in the fray after a national championship a couple years ago under dubious circumstances. And also, obviously a bit of a fallback with Jim Harbaugh going off to Los Angeles this year. But Larry Ellison, a name I'm quite familiar with because I follow the stock market and just big business in general. Well, he's the founder of Oracle and a billionaire by all rights. Also, Dave Portnoy, a big name in the sports media space. He's the founder of Barstool Sports. He was all but going out there and basically taking credit for getting Bryce Underwood here. The number that's being floated about $10 million total over 4 years. So what about $2.5 million annual value there? That's quite an upgrade over $1.5 million, no question about that. Easy to say, hey, just kind of peanuts there for Dave Portnoy and Larry Ellison, those type of guys. And perhaps you're right, but I will say the odd thing about all of this to me is how do Portnoy and Ellison benefit from any of this, at least tangibly? Now, don't get me wrong, ultimately all value is subjective, but my point here is that Portnoy and Ellison don't own the team. This isn't a professional sports environment. It's not like they own stock in the Michigan Wolverines per se, or could sell the team based on, we got a bunch of national championships that increases the value of the team. This is all just, hey, this makes me feel good because I'm a Michigan alum and a big Michigan fan, all that good stuff. I can see that being worth some money, but now we're going to get into the tens of millions of dollars here. No wonder the colleges themselves don't want to get into this game. I will admit, though, $1.5 million to $2.5 million, that really is peanuts compared to the pro sports environment. So if you're one of in the rich guy class who likes to, swing his power around in social situations, this is sort of the next best thing. College sports have become a free-for-all to the point where, again, guys back in the day would do this under the table. Well, now guys like David Portnoy, who's made a bunch of money being a little bombastic and supporting some louder voices, I suppose, in the sports media space, well, now he's out there promoting himself, his brand, Michigan, all very much out there in the open with his wallet, essentially. By the way, the Ohio State Buckeyes, their athletic director told Yahoo that they spent about $20 million on the 2024 roster. So there you go. That's about as direct of an answer as I've ever seen about the cost of doing business in college football. So the question is, while Laird Veach, I did it. I didn't call him Brett Veach. I did it, guys. But seriously, Laird Veach, the Missouri athletic director, has talked a good game so far and said, hey, Missouri's going to go all in on football, essentially, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to compete at the financial level. But we need a step up from our fans. We need somebody to buy in. And don't get me wrong, the everyday season ticket holders, even the ones who are at the higher echelon, who have the best parking and the suites and all that stuff, yeah, they probably need to step their game up a little bit. But really what we're talking about here is, who is Missouri's Larry Ellison? Who is Missouri's Dave Portnoy? I think there's some obvious Walmart-related names out there that some of you are yelling back at your podcast machine right now, and I totally understand that. I don't know how interested those particular people are in funding Missouri sports at the moment. How about Max Scherzer? He's made hundreds of millions of bucks playing Major League Baseball over the years. I'm just saying it doesn't matter who it is. But if there's somebody out there, hey, Stan Kroenke, I know you spent $5 billion on a new stadium, SoFi Stadium out there in Los Angeles. Well, hey, $2.5 million for a quarterback. That seems like something he would find in perhaps the cigarette ashtray of his spare golf cart in Stan Kroenke's case. So obviously I'm being a little bit sarcastic there, but just to the point, I'm being hyperbolic to make a point. Missouri, if we're going to win, if we're going to continue to compete for playoff spots on a regular basis in the SEC, not only in the SEC, but of course the deep waters against the Big Ten that they're of course swimming in this area as well. Well, we're just going to have to, all I can say is time is going to tell there. I've been impressed by what Missouri has done so far with their NIL infrastructure, as the nation has been, I think. Brian Smith, the scoutmaster, our lead recruiting analyst here at Locked On, told me and our audience that, yeah, Missouri's really kind of the talk of college football, at least in recruiting circles right now, with what they've done, how they've stepped up in the world. Well, guess what? I sound like Dana Carvey's Joe Biden impression when I say guess what there. But seriously, it's not just about Bryce Underwood, of course. There was another highly ranked quarterback who had been committed to Southern Cal for a while that just around the same time flipped to Colorado and Coach Deion Sanders, Coach Prime. So what does that mean? Matt Zollers, any recruit, basically, but especially a quarterback like Matt Zollers, a guy who's been firmly committed to Missouri for a long time, just like Bryce Underwood had been firmly committed to LSU for a long time. Well, anything is possible. That's all I can say, especially until a signing day gets here and even beyond that at this point. Guys can just leave during the middle of spring practice at this point. Speaking of Michigan, as Jeremiah Beasley basically did, he left either during the middle or right after spring practice, that type of deal, and transferred to Missouri. So the idea that, hey, you agree to something, you're stuck there unless you sit out for a year, obviously that is completely out the window. And really the ironic part of this is, of course, it was horrible news when Matt Zollers had that ankle injury, and long term he should be fine. But in terms of, hey, if there's some sharks out there, some billionaire sharks looking to pluck Missouri's quarterback, well, maybe the fact that he's got hopefully what's a serious but short-term injury here, maybe that leaves him less vulnerable to outside offers, just sort of thinking off the top of my head there. Regardless, at least at this point, there's no indication whatsoever that Zollers is thinking about moving around or anything like that. All of the indications are he is committed strongly to Missouri. But again, who knows? In this new environment, when there is this type of money, the Larry Ellisons and Dave Portnoys are throwing $1 million a year higher than what you were expecting. Well, as a 17, 18-year-old, that gives you a lot to think about. In my argument that Luther Burden should be honored on senior day, at least if he once said honor, was definitely met with some resistance online. I felt like most people agreed with me. Well, but the people who didn't were very, very vocal about it, and that's all good. But I do have a response to this. If tradition is so important, well, now you tell me, because to me, we've thrown away a lot of traditions in college football. There are a lot more important hills to have died on than this particular case. So I'm going to make that case once again here in a little bit and talk about an improving Missouri basketball team later in the show as well. But first, let's talk about FanDuel, because you got to get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started again with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. From my experience, there is no place better than FanDuel. So check out FanDuel.com and never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Clearly the least impressive arguments against Luther Burden. I'm coming to J-Mac in a second, but Luther Burden being honored on senior day, well, a lot of responses were simply, no, he's a junior. Gee, thank you guys. I had not considered that particular angle before. And just to make my point again, I think Burden, again, if he would want this type of thing, if he would like to come hug his family in the middle of Faurot Field on Saturday, who could be against that, in my opinion? Because simply put, I love tradition as much as anybody, but this is one of those times, I think, where you can make an exception. And you can say, oh, it's a slippery slope, and I suppose that it is, but if you think about the instances where you would have done this in the recent past, I would have done it for Jeremy Maclin, a guy who you knew was going to be playing his last season at Faurot Field at that moment. Blaine Gabbert, maybe, Sheldon Richardson. I mean, who else? There just aren't that many cases of guys who were leaving school early. Justin Smith back in the day, that type of deal. Again, if they're the opening act for the main event, which would be, again, the seniors, I just don't see how that ruins the tradition. I think that just adds on to the tradition a little bit. Again, especially in an era where so much tradition has been thrown by the wayside. Hey, I can remember where the band used to play during the game, and it wasn't just a nightclub at every Missouri football and basketball game. But hey, that's the new world we live in. Times change. I still enjoy going to the games. I think sometimes some venues do the club a lot better than others. That's a topic for another time. But again, in a world where Missouri is basically going to have, I believe, 5 guys, if I've counted up correctly here: Brady Cook, Mitch Walters, Johnny Walker, Drake Heismeyer, and Will Norris. Those are the only 5 guys who are going to walk in this ceremony that started their career at the University of Missouri. That's pretty typical these days. This isn't unique to Missouri by any stretch of the imagination, but back in the day, that number would have been 90% of the guys who walk down there. Of course, you'd still have your occasional transfers who make a big difference on the basketball court. Somebody like Paul O'Linney immediately comes to mind. Jason Conley, people like that. You know, Mookie Cooper was pretty darn close to being a forever Missouri guy as well. He was around for 4 years, so he had 1 year at Ohio State his freshman year. That doesn't make him less of a Tiger to me. And so therefore, Luther Burden, for all of those guys I just mentioned, all big-time Tigers, all guys who are very loyal to the University of Missouri, all guys who obviously deserve their moment in the sun on senior day, I think that just because Luther Burden, you're almost punishing him for being too good at football in a weird way. He's going to He's going to move beyond his senior season. I get it. You like to save it for seniors. I think in this particular case, I think I would make an exception. And again, it's not just Luther. I would have done it for Justin Smith and Jeremy Macklin back in the day as well. Every few years, you're going to have somebody who's that special, who's going to leave early, and it's obvious. And obvious he was one of the great players in history in the sport at Missouri too. So to me, I don't think that's really negating tradition or history. I think it's just adding on to it a little bit. No different than when Missouri started lighting the dome after victories. That didn't stop any of the other traditions at Missouri. The MIZZOU chant lives on. The floating flip tiger drill lives on, and all that good stuff. And yes, whitewashing the block M's as well. That's for all of you who listened to the SEC squad last week. So to me, this doesn't negate tradition, which is something that's been done a lot lately. I think this just adds on to it a little bit. Just my humble opinion. Reasonable people can disagree on this one. So one of my everyday listeners is Mike from Kansas City. And he says, an old friend of mine, by the way, Mizzou Nation, do yourself a favor and don't play the what-if game when it comes to the final minute of the South Carolina game and the playoffs. Mizzou very easily could have lost to Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, and Auburn. In a year of craziness, savor the 8 wins and hopefully a 9th next Saturday. I think this is a point well taken, and I couldn't help, at least I should say, in the first segment of my previous program, well, just getting a little bit bummed out, thinking back that, boy, after Oklahoma beat Auburn, after Ole Miss was upset by Florida, and all the other upsets from this past week, it was hard not to think, man, we really could have been right in this thing in terms of getting into the playoff. But I think Mike's point is really well taken here because, again, in a year where Missouri got blown out by Alabama, for Oklahoma to then beat Alabama, for Missouri to beat Vanderbilt, who beat Alabama, none of this totally makes sense if I'm doing the Charlie Day, trying to get everything to cross together and make sense, a meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I think that's about as much sense as it makes right now, which is to say this season hasn't made a ton of sense. There's the top teams. I think there's the top 6 or 7 teams that are all pretty well bunched together nationally. And then you've got maybe the next 20 to 25 teams or so. On any given Saturday, just about anything can happen. Heck, I could probably stretch it out further than that, but I think you get my point. And to Mike's point, let's savor the 8 wins, hopefully get a 9th on Saturday. And on Saturday, right now, the Tigers currently 3.5-point favorites over Arkansas. I got to say that line was a little surprisingly low to me, and I'm definitely going to lean toward the Tigers right now. It feels to me like they're the more motivated and together group. I got to wonder, is Sam Pittman, is his job still safe here? If Arkansas loses this game, goes 6-6, is that good enough for the Razorbacks and their fans? If my colleague over at Locked On Razorbacks, John Neighbors, is any indication, the answer to that is a resounding no. He is not the biggest Sam Pittman fan in the world, to say the least. So that does make me question just how much Arkansas is going to really want this game. They've already ruled out one of their top pass rushers. I think Missouri right now, if I had to pick a side, I'd definitely take the Tigers minus 3.5. Not an official pick yet for me or anything, unlike last week where we rode Mississippi State quite successfully. The Tigers against Mississippi State, obviously, I mean. And Missouri, another huge victory yesterday and another 100-plus point outing for the Tigers. I think it's quite clear that this team is better than last year's team. Another 0-19 SEC season shan't be forthcoming. But just how much better is Missouri? And it sure looks like the starting 5 is probably set for the rest of the season, barring injury. So let's talk about Dennis Gates' squad. But first, I want to talk some game time, because as much as I love college basketball, I love the pros too, and especially going to NBA games in random big cities where you might happen to be traveling during this time of year. If you're having to kill some time, you're looking for something to do in, say, Indianapolis or Oklahoma City, somewhere like that, go on Game Time. Get some tickets. I'm telling you, you're going to have an absolute blast. And the best part is Game Time is going to get you the best prices, the best seats. Just toggle on Game Time picks. They're going to narrow it all down to the absolute best deals. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. By the way, as we speak here, Memphis and UConn in overtime right now. UConn with just a 1-point lead over Memphis, who took down our Missouri Tigers in the opening game of the season. So in a way, that could be an encouraging result for Missouri. We'll just have to see what happens at the end of that ball game. Either way, an impressive result that's going to shoot Memphis up the KenPom ratings. No doubt about that. But when it comes to Missouri, again, another impressive shellacking from the Tigers. That's now 3 in a row. Make it hopefully 4 against Lindenwood on Wednesday, who is of similar quality to some of Missouri's most recent opponents, especially Mississippi Valley State, I would say. And then the real season begins after Wednesday. Then it'll be 6 days away. Missouri plays Cal at home, and then the dreaded Kansas Jayhawks. Would you believe Missouri is actually a 2-point underdog in that game, at least according to the KenPom projections? So the projections like Missouri a decent bit and actually dislike the Jayhawks more than the conventional rankings anyway. KenPom still has Kansas as a top 10 team, but closer to 10th than number 1 in the country. But more specifically about the Tigers, you just got to be, once again, really impressed with not only how Caleb Grill has started this season, Tamar Bates another game, but man, Anthony Robinson having a real sophomore breakout here. Nearly the first triple-double in Mizzou history, by the way, just filling up the stat sheet from all angles. Again, Robinson didn't quite get there, but just to give you an idea of how difficult it is to get that particular feat in a college basketball game. It's never happened in Mizzou history. And Dennis Gates says, well, for all the talk about his rotations, one thing that seems pretty set in stone right now is says he has no plans to change up his current starters. Anthony Robinson, Tamar Bates, Honor Boateng, Josh Gray, and Mark Mitchell. He says, if anything, I'll sub more quickly to get shooters in the game versus changing the starting lineup. I'm not going to change the starting lineup at this point. I think our guys have a rhythm, and it was also great to see Tony Perkins out there playing up to his potential. And Gates was specifically asked about the rotations recently, went into quite a bit of depth on his answer. And one point he made was sort of that, hey, rotations, look at what happens in the NBA these days when nobody is actually playing 82 games anymore. So on a given night, yeah, there could be games where guys off the bench in the NBA are suddenly having to play 25, 30 minutes a game and take maybe a lion's share of the shots, or at least a lot more shots and opportunities than they normally get. So the reality is, whether that equates to better basketball or not, that's the reality of the NBA right now. So his point is, hey, I'm kind of preparing you for what professional basketball is actually going to look like. You don't just get to be coddled and have the perfect rotation at all times. Again, this is kind of what I'm reading into from Dennis Gates' point a little bit. Now, I will say, though, as somebody who watches the NBA, of course, very closely, that's all well and good in the regular season. But then the playoffs, well, that's almost, I'd say, more akin to SEC league play, for example, where obviously in the playoffs, NBA teams are, for the most part, not playing 10 guys a night. They're cutting down their rotations quite a bit, and the star players are playing upwards of 40-plus minutes a night. So I think that's more akin to what you typically see. At least we've seen for years and years in college basketball. We'll see how much Dennis Gates sticks to these big rotations when we get into, well, the real part of the season, as I just called it, and how effective it is, of course, as well. And what Gates said is he's really impressed with the level of unselfishness that this team has shown. And obviously minutes going up and down, it's not always guys aren't always going to take that great, but he thinks the level of engagement is there, the level of communication, the level of talk, the level of support for the teammates. Nobody's pouting on the sidelines and all that good stuff. So the goal is basically to wear teams down with waves of players, and in theory, that's great. The problem is you need a whole bunch of guys buying into that. If Dennis Gates can truly get it, well, this team's got a real chance to make the NCAA tournament. And the thing is, while Missouri does look, I think, quite a bit better for sure, the SEC is also looking quite deep in basketball as well. And the Tigers, despite being, I believe, 49th in KenPom nationally, are projected to just go 8-10 in the league. That would be 18-13 overall. That'd be a huge improvement from last year, but would almost certainly be short of an NCAA tournament berth. But I will say, of those projections, 9 of Missouri's losses are projected by 6 points or fewer. So why 6? Why is that sort of my, arbitrary cutoff? Well, I just think, hey, if you have 2 more threes go in, or you're within a couple threes in the final minute, you've got a chance to win. That's sort of the way I look at it. So a little bit arbitrary, but just to the point I'm trying to make here is that while Missouri is about a 500 club in the league, according to KenPom projected, there's a lot of potential variance in there, both good and bad, no question about that. So hold on to your butts. Every SEC basketball game is going to be important, so that'll make for some fun content for me. Hopefully you've enjoyed it today as well, and thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On SEC podcast. It's not just about the SEC squad every Thursday. Of course, Chris Gordy holds no punches covering the conference where it just means more. So find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to finer podcasts. And until next time, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.